Big tech is being pressured to take sides with barbarians by their own big tech employees. Hey everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is Right Angle, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, there was a Politico story that just chilled me to my bones when I came across this morning. The headline said, U.S. tech giants vies over Israel titans despite ceasefire. And all I could think is, man, when you got people firing missiles at civilians, you need to take sides with them a lot until the other side cries uncle. But of course, that isn't the case in today's topsy-turvy, muddled-up, shook-up world. Scott, the Politico report says that tech employees who previously pressured the corporate behemoths like Amazon, Facebook, and Google into dropping projects with the Pentagon and with communist China are strategizing with outside activists. We're talking about BDS organizations. We're talking about Hamas cover organizations over the best way to agitate against cloud contracts with the Israeli government. They're considering a range of options, including cajoling shareholders and circulating letters to the company's CEOs, something employees at Amazon and Google did in the last week. I don't know how to put this delicately, Scott. I know that's not exactly my forte, so I'll just say this outright. When you see missiles being fired at apartment buildings just randomly, and you think, man, I got to do something to put a stop to those apartment buildings being able to defend themselves. How does that happen?
You know, when you go to work for another organization, you take on the name of that organization, you take on a responsibility for the reputation of that organization. And if at some point you find yourself at odds with the goals and the mission of that organization, it's incumbent upon you to protest that right after you quit, right after you walk out. You know, take your golden parachute and get the heck out of there. And then you can form an organization of former employees of Google or former employees of Facebook or whatever it is. But while you're working for the organization, get on the payroll, having your life provided for by the people who are investors in that organization, then you're not there to side with anybody on anything. And especially if you're in the business of providing a neutral platform that is available to all for free speech. You don't get the opportunity. It's almost like joining the U.S. military, where you go in there, and I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat, I don't care if you're a socialist or a communist, you're there to carry out the mission of the United States military. And that's what you will do. You will not put on your uniform and stand up in a public place and make a political pronouncement. If you wish to do that, there's a place for that. And that place is called after retirement from the military. After discharge, then you can go out there and mouth off all that you want. But these people, what they're trying to do is to, and I don't really even care about the issue. The fundamental core of this for me is not Israel or Palestine or anything like that. It is people who have taken on the reputation of an organization, the cloak that provides for them, and they're standing up saying, I'm a Google employee. I am a Facebook employee, and here's what I think. In other words, you're taking on Facebook's corporate. That's something that's of value to Facebook. Facebook has what do they call that in the accounting world? But there's a literal. What's that? Yeah, there's a value of the goodwill of a company. You own that. It's an asset, and they're co-opting that and saying, I'm now going to use that for this cause that I care about. I'm all for your free speech. That's great. Get the heck out of Google and say anything you want.
Indeed. Bill, you did a segment last week when Zoe was filling in for Scott, who was ailing at the time, calling that famous photograph, became instantly famous, of the two sides of the Hamas missile war. You just called it the most iconic photograph of the 21st century, if I remember your words correctly. And on one side, you saw the Hamas random rockets firing into Israeli city. And on the other side, where Israel's Iron Dome missiles going crazy trying to knock these things down. Now, on the one side, you have Hamas rockets, which are primitive. You and I could probably build one in a weekend, even without having any money from Iran. The other side, Missile defense requires the most cutting edge technology that is available to anyone, anywhere. It's very hard to design. It's very hard to manufacture. Most people can't even conceive of what goes into ballistic missile defense. So, what would you say to these Google and Amazon employees who would rob Israel of the right to shoot down those incoming Hamas missiles?
Well, I titled that picture Good and Evil, and that's just all there is to it. The good is the snaky part of these things trying to defend, and the evil are just these straight line, very simple, very crude rockets that were launched first. So it's a lot to unpack here, so I'm just going to try and go fast with this one, Steve. The first thing I would say to them would be, there's no question that the Palestinians started this action, this event. So my first response to them would be what I mentioned on the show. If somebody is standing on the far side of the room and they're shooting at you, and your choice is to either shoot back at them and kill them because you're a much better shot than they are, or to shoot the bullets out of the air in order to not injure the people doing the shooting, what would that tell you about the motivations of the person who is going to that incredible time, expense, and effort in order to shoot the bullets out of the air rather than simply kill the people doing the shooting? That would be the first argument I would make, and it would bounce off their skulls just as the rest of all of these things do. So let's get down to the brass tacks of this issue. Scott made an excellent point based on integrity, which he has, and most of us have, and our listeners have, and we try to maintain. And the integrity would be, your job is to basically keep the information moving. It's not your job to issue an opinion on it. But when you find out that Zuckerberg spends $1 billion on influencing the election, they are in fact performing their company's stated purpose, which is to change society based on the filtration of the news. They're not in violation of Facebook or Google policy. They're in compliance with it. They're doing what they were hired to do. And to me, I think you can get to the heart of this by combining two different biological things that have been here forever. I remember when I was 24, and that's about the age of the people who are making these decisions and these employees. They're in their early to mid-20s. The thing I remember most about that period was that I was never so positively sure I was right about things that I knew nothing about. So on one hand, you have this decision being made by people who are biologically speaking at their most stupid. That's just biological fact. That if they were younger, they could still be learning. If they were older, they'd have some experience, some of the stupidity be beaten out of them. But right at that age where they're making decisions, they're as dumb as they're going to get. And here is where everything gets tied together. I think that the reason that they can side with Palestine is because these people either never played baseball or football or soccer or went out and climbed trees or did anything else. And I'm going to stand by this. If you go out and play as a kid with other kids, there's going to come a point when, if you're a good kid, someone's going to hit you first. And if you're a bad kid, you're going to hit somebody else first. But there is going to be a cause and effect relationship, and it's going to be very clear to you at a very early age. This person started it. Remember when we would have that conversation back when this was a free country? Blah, 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 blah. Well, who started it? Who started it? Yeah. We used to ask that question all the time. That's the question that kids ask. Who started it? There's a big fight. Who started it? It's not a question of who won it or who's stronger. Who started it? The person who started it is responsible for it. And if you don't have that experience growing up, then the idea of cause and effect is not something you've ever experienced. We talked about this on the Stratosphere Lounge last time we had the show. How many people out there, how many of these 24-year-olds at Google do you think have ever had the wind knocked out of them physically?
That's miserable. Seriously,
now I'm serious as I can be. How many of them do you think have ever had the wind knocked out of them physically? I'm going to say it's less than 5%. And I'll bet it's less than that. What does that mean? Well, When you get the wind knocked out of you, it's because you hit somebody or somebody hits you and you go down and you go through this terror of not being able to breathe because it is a horrifying experience. You just can't breathe. And then you get over it. And then you realize, okay, so this is what happens when two people collide and who started. And all of this stuff has been utterly taken away from them. And they're left in this world where they're not given any ability. Anytime they have to react to anything emotionally, they're just completely coddled and taken away. The people that are controlling the flow of information are their most dehumanized population in our history. And what I mean by dehumanized, I don't mean inhuman. I mean they are dehumanized to the degree that they have never been able to be in conflict. They've never been able to succeed. They've never been able to fail. They've never been given a chance to grow emotionally from small defeats and victories to larger ones and larger ones and larger ones. We have now got the world's information supply controlled by people who get hysterical over the smallest things, who've never been in a conflict of any kind whatsoever, don't have the faintest idea of being an innocent person who suddenly just gets pushed by somebody just because they felt like doing it. They can't connect to Israel on this regard. If you tell them, well, Palestine started first, means nothing to them. Does mean something to somebody who's been just walking down the street or walking across a baseball field and having some other kid come up and just punch you and knock you over. And here we are. So Google's not going to change and Facebook's not going to change. The only thing that can happen is to build parallel structures, alternate structures to these, and given the market for it, I'm just astonished that it hasn't happened already.
Yeah, the only detail I think you missed there is if one of our Bay Area coder friends who might have blue hair and be gender fluid and pick out their own imaginary personal pronouns were to spend a week in Gaza, they would not last a week in Gaza.
Let me just add one thing to that, just because you just mentioned, and I mean, it's very, very simple. That blue-haired person you're talking about, you will hear them say, if I say something that they don't like, they will say, that is a physical assault on me. You are committing physical violence against me. This is what you will hear that generation say. And that tells me that that person has never had physical violence directed towards them, because if they had, they wouldn't be able to equate the fact that I said something that they don't like with a physical attack. And this to me just simply reinforces my point that they don't have the faintest idea of what is actually going on there in terms of life and death and actual blood injury. It's all a series of competing narratives for them.
Yeah. We hear a lot about Israeli colonialism and human rights abuses and all the rest, but I'm going to give a little history lesson. It's not a short history lesson for our friends out in the Bay Area, Mountain View and Cupertino and all the rest. Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005, unilaterally. There's no Israeli military presence in Gaza. Not only that, there aren't any Jews left in Gaza. Israel forced their own settlers, their own people, out of the homesteads they had built in Gaza back in 2005. Forced them out. Turned it over to the Palestinians to run as they see fit. There's no colonialism in Gaza. There are human rights abuses in Gaza. By the way, Hamas runs the place. It is a Palestinian terror organization and has one of the worst civil rights, human rights records in the world. And that is according to Amnesty International, which issued just a damning report earlier this year. You can look it up. They're your friends at Amnesty International. They wouldn't lie to you about this place. Gaza is a place of torture. It's a place of abuse. It is a place of no civil rights whatsoever. And there's not a single Israeli soldier. There's not a single Jew in Gaza at all. And Gaza is where every single one of those 3,000 missiles was fired from. So there's your little history lesson. I'm going to end with a riddle. Don't worry, I've got an answer for it. You know what the difference is between an Arab in Gaza and an Arab in Israel is? And by the way, there are a lot of Arabs in Israel, about 20% of the population. The difference is an Arab in Israel can vote in free elections and does for a government that is constitutionally required to recognize their individual rights and does. Thus endeth the lesson. Now sit down, shut up, and learn to code. That's your right angle on that. Brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.